that we will be evaluating our approach with regard to how best to achieve a two-state solution. Now, our position remains that we continue to believe that the preferred path to resolve this conflict is for the parties to reach an agreement on final status issues directly. But certainly, while that's been our position, obviously the Prime Minister's position has changed.
So how are you going to do that without Israel?
Well, I'm not going to prejudge what we'll do. The election was yesterday. Those comments were made 2 days ago, so I'm sure we'll continue to discuss.
When you say you're going to reevaluate the approach to how best to bring about a two-state solution, implicit in that, I think, but I just want to make sure, is that you are still going to push for a two-state solution.
Yes, absolutely.
How exactly are you going to do that if one of the parties to the two-state solution is pushing back?
Well, Matt, we'll remain in touch with key stakeholders to find a way forward. We're not quite there yet.
Well, no kidding, you're not there yet. You're further away from it now than you have been probably ever before, because now you have a prime minister who's been reelected or looks like he's about to form a government, who says that a two-state solution is not what is in the best interest of Israel.
I understand that. That's why I said we're going to be evaluating.
But I mean, you're trying over and over and over again the same approach, which doesn't work and is not going to lead to your. It was often said during the last iteration of peace talks that the U.S. can't want a solution more than the two parties do, and now
that remains true.
Well, right, but it doesn't look like one of the parties now says it's absolutely opposed to that.
Yes, we're aware. That's why I addressed those comments.
But I don't understand what's the point of reevaluating it then if there's no way you're going to achieve it. Or are you hoping that the Prime Minister maybe changes his mind, that this was just some kind of campaign rhetoric that he used to drum up support?
I'm just not going to outline the options, Matt, but obviously we're aware of the comments. Certainly the fact that he's changed his position has an impact, and we're certainly aware of that.
All right. And then more broadly, we're now in a situation where the government of the United States and the government of Israel are diametrically opposed on two extremely significant international security issues: the Iran negotiations and the Middle East peace process, such as it is, was, or will be. Are you concerned at all that that we find ourselves in a situation where the President and the Prime Minister of Israel are at such loggerheads on two issues that the U.S. has traditionally regarded as being extremely important?
Well, Matt, I think no matter what government is formed, that's obviously the process that they're in now. Well, we will continue our close military, intelligence, and security cooperation with Israel. This close security cooperation is essential to the security of the Israeli people, and it certainly is in the interests of the United States. We've been long familiar with the views of the Prime Minister on Iran. We don't think that his win has impacted the Iran negotiations or will. Certainly his recent comments on opposition to the Palestinians having a state have caused us to evaluate our approach moving forward. But beyond that, there are issues we work together on that we will continue to.
So the security relationship will stay the same regardless of this. That's what you're saying. Did you answer in response to the question earlier if the United States would continue to, given these two huge disagreements now, will the United States continue to be Israel's protector at the UN and other fora? You may have answered that earlier in response to the earlier question.
What I said was we're not going to prejudge what steps, any decision about what the United States may do at the UN. Obviously, Saeed has asked in the past about the ICC. We've said previously, we've made clear our opposition to Palestinian efforts to join the statute of the ICC. This step does nothing to further the aspiration of the Palestinian people. We still believe, obviously, that a negotiation between the two parties is the preferred outcome. But we'll continue to discuss these issues moving forward.
All right. Well, that's on the ICC. What about on a Security Council resolution that would call for a two-state solution?
As I said, we're currently evaluating our approach. We're not going to prejudge what we would do if there was a UN action.
So you're leaving open the possibility that the United States, this administration, would not use its veto to protect Israel from a Security Council resolution that the Israeli government thinks is harmful to its country?
Well, the Prime Minister's recent statements call into question his commitment to a two-state solution. I think we all agree on that point. But that doesn't mean that we've made a decision about changing our position with respect to the UN. I have nothing to outline for you on that today.
Can we
Okay,
go back
so-
to
so-
some of
so-
the language that was used during the campaign 2 days ago, 3 days ago? And Netanyahu complained about the number of Arab Israeli
I
citizens
spoke
who
to
were
this
going to vote.
yesterday.
Yes. Well, I want to follow up on this. Your colleague told reporters while traveling with the president, and I'm quoting Josh Earnest, the U.S. and this administration are deeply concerned about rhetoric that seeks to marginalize Arab Israeli citizens. It undermines the values and democratic ideals that have been important to our democracy and an important part of what binds the U.S. and Israel together. He went on to say that he did not know whether Secretary Kerry, in his brief phone call, had conveyed the U.S.'s concern about this kind of language.
Well, that sounds similar to what I said yesterday, and perhaps he wasn't. They weren't asked about it at the White House yesterday, and I can reiterate
No,
that
this
from
is
here.
this is on today's trip.
Secretary, I know, but
Right.
I addressed this issue,
Right.
the same issue yesterday,
Right,
is
but
what
do
I'm
you-
referring
yeah,
to. And
but-
let me finish.
Sure.
And what Josh said is consistent with what I said yesterday. So that's the point I'm making. Second, as I said, the Secretary's call was to express congratulations. It was not a call where they discussed substance.
But is there a plan to actually discuss this kind of language? It has angered many people, both Arab and Jewish, inside Israel, as well as alarmed people in the region. Does the U.S. intend to raise this point with Prime Minister Netanyahu about whether this is actually helpful to leading his country?
Well, Roz, I'm sure there will be additional calls, and I'm sure we'll do readouts of them at the appropriate time.
Jim, just a
Go ahead.
quick follow-up. Having, listened to what Mr. Netanyahu said about the two-state solution, do you still consider him a partner for peace in this process?
I think I've addressed this question,
Okay,
Said.
but let me just ask you one last question on
Sure.
this issue. Do you still consider the West Bank to be militarily occupied territory?
I think we've addressed this in the
Do you-
past too, Said.
I'd like to hear it again. Do you
I
still
think we've
consider-
addressed it. Do we have a new topic? Go ahead.
Southeast-
Why don't you go ahead in the striped shirt there?
On Crimea, yesterday you issued a statement, but can you
On Crimea?
on Crimea 1 year anniversary since
Yes.
Russia's annexation? Can you repeat the message and then what's the U.S. position on this annexation of Crimea?
Well, we continue to believe that Crimea remains a part of Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign country, and we believe the respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine and all of its people is central to the discussions that are ongoing now. Go ahead.
South Asia.
Okay.
Couple questions, starting with Sri Lanka. Indian Prime Minister was in Sri Lanka, and as far as rebuilding Sri Lanka is concerned, he committed hundreds of thousands of homes to be built and also millions of dollars from the Indian community and Indian government. What is the U.S. position as far as under the new government in Sri Lanka, rebuilding ethnic communities and, of course, in whole Sri Lanka?
I don't have details on this in front of me. Obviously, we're supportive of efforts to rebuild communities. We can see if there's more to convey.
And one on Pakistan as far
I think
as...
we have to move on. Go ahead, Pam.
At the ALBA summit in Venezuela, Latin American leaders, including Raul Castro, voiced their support for Venezuela's rejection of the new U.S. sanctions. First of all, what is states' reaction? And then secondly, what is your reaction, especially considering this comes at a time when we are in the midst of trying to reestablish diplomatic ties with Cuba?
Well, the focus of the discussions with Cuba during the ongoing efforts to reestablish diplomatic relations and to discuss the reopening of the embassy are on those exact issues. We understand several regional leaders met yesterday in Caracas to discuss the U.S. sanctions and the executive order released March 9th. We have outlined the reasons for this action, and that is something we convey publicly and privately, that it was an appropriate exercise of U.S. sovereignty with respect to our visas and our financial system. The sanctions are directed at individuals who committed human rights abuses and undermined democratic governments, not at the Venezuelan people or the Venezuelan economy, and that's certainly what we will continue to convey.
But does this kind of public support muddy the waters in terms of Cuba's statements, considering it's coming at a time when you're trying to reestablish ties?
Does it muddy the waters in what capacity?
In terms of U.S. negotiations with Cuba, in that Cuba is also voicing support for Venezuela and taking a stance against the U.S. sanctions.
Well, the focus of our discussions with the Cuban government are on reopening our embassy. They're on reestablishing diplomatic relations. That's what the discussions were focused on when Assistant Secretary Roberta Jacobson was there for talks 2 days ago, and that's what we expect them to continue to be focused on. It doesn't mean we agree on every issue.
Is there an update on the situation with the number of U.S. diplomats in Venezuela?
There's not an update. I know there was a deadline, so to speak, earlier this week, but there are ongoing discussions, so there isn't a public update at this point in time.
I just wanted to know if you were able to get a fuller readout of the talks in Havana that ended.
I don't have more details to add.
Whether or not the issue of Venezuela was raised during them.
I don't have more to add. Any more in Cuba before we continue? Okay, go ahead.
One on Afghanistan.
Sure.
What will the focus of the talks when the Secretary hosts the Afghan President and CEO next week?
Well, I expect we will be doing a preview call probably on Friday, so I will point you to that. Obviously, it's an opportunity to have discussions about a range of issues, including our strategic, our security, our diplomatic, and our economic relationship, but we'll be previewing more substantially on Friday.
And would there be any participation from Pakistan side in these talks? Is there any level of participation from them?
No, I don't believe so, no.
I wondered if you could just answer the question about why it was decided to hold the talks in Camp David. Was there a particular reason? I mean, it's unusual.
Well, it's certainly
Beautiful in the Catoctin Mountains and stuff.
Yes, I'm sure it is beautiful.
and a beautiful drive.
Not so beautiful drive.
It is an opportunity, I think, and it's been used, as you know, historically, many times in the past to have dialogues about a range of important issues. So it just certainly signifies how important we think this relationship is and how vital we think these talks will be.
So do we expect some historic results out of these meetings?
I wouldn't put it in those terms. I think obviously the Abdullah and Ghani, coming to the United States and the United States hosting a couple days of meetings next week is significant and is just an indication of how important we see the relationship is and how committed we are to the future of Afghanistan.
I have one more question on.
Would you expect just on
To
Afghanistan?
host it at Camp David, I'm fascinated by the focus on this, but I think it's been used, as you all know, many times historically for a range of discussions about a range of topics. And certainly we supported the idea and we're part of the discussion in terms of where to host the meetings. The Secretary will be hosting the meetings on Monday at Camp David on behalf of the President. Obviously, there'll be additional meetings. And as I mentioned, we'll be previewing those later this week.
And do you expect the troop levels to be a sort of main topic of discussion?
I think there'll be a number of topics discussed, including the strategic relationship, including the economic relationship. Obviously, as I mentioned again, we'll be previewing this later this week.
What is the State Department's view on the drawdown of troops? Because the President is reviewing right now the pace of the drawdown of troops.
Well, as many of you know, President Obama and President Ghani have had regular discussions on the security transition and peace and reconciliation processes in Afghanistan. And obviously, we're planning for President Ghani's upcoming visit to Washington next week. President Ghani has requested some flexibility in the troop drawdown timeline and base closure sequencing over the next 2 years, and we're actively considering this request. General Campbell, and this is all known, but has developed recommendations to enhance the training, advising, and assisting of the Afghan National Security Forces, the maintenance of appropriate counterterrorism capabilities, and ways to manage in ways to manage in a way that prioritizes force protection for our troops. These discussions remain ongoing. No decisions have been made. Next week is an opportunity to continue to have discussions.
But the Secretary is open to the idea of being flexible on troop levels in Afghanistan.
Well, again, I think these are proposals that have been put out there by General Campbell. This is a decision the President of the United States would make. I'm not going to further preview or lay out any discussions happening among the national security team.
Thank you.
One more try. Have the Afghans raised any concern about their potentially being at risk of being infiltrated by ISIL recruiters?
Well, I think the Afghans themselves have spoken to this, so I would point you to their comments. We believe that the nascent presence of ISIL in Afghanistan represents a rebranding of a few marginalized Taliban, but we're still taking this potential threat with its dangerous rhetoric seriously. We're working closely with the Afghan government to evaluate the dynamic nature of this fledgling network, and the potential emergence of ISIL represents an additional opportunity to bring the Afghans and the Pakistanis together to confront this common threat.
You just used the word fledgling. You mean in Afghanistan? It
Yes,
certainly isn't fledgling in Iraq
I
and
mean in
Syria.
Afghanistan, yes.
On
Yes,
Syria-
Justin.
Yeah.
On Afghanistan?
Yeah, just
Well, let's,
quickly.
I think we have to keep going here. Go ahead,
Actually,
Justin.
sorry,
Go ahead.
I didn't hear, but that's my
It's okay,
fault.
go ahead.
Did you, your response to Lalit's question about whether there'd be any Pakistan involvement in the talks next week?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you.
So members of the Syrian military are claiming they shot down a U.S. drone over Latakia. Is there any official clarification from the Syrian government about that? Are they really claiming they shot this down? The Pentagon hasn't been able to confirm that it was in fact shot down. Do you have anything on that?
Well, I can confirm, as I'm sure you may have from the Pentagon, and certainly they'd be the lead on this, that yesterday U.S. military controllers lost contact with an unarmed, remotely piloted aircraft operating over northwest Syria. The Department of Defense is looking into the incident, will provide more details when available. Obviously, I don't have more in terms of the Syrian government's comments or public
Right.
comments or what they may mean.
Because people see it as a little odd because Syria has, the Syrian military has taken sort of a passive approach to U.S. Air presence in the region. So it would come as a surprise to you, would it not, if they had in fact shot this out of the sky?
Well, we don't have any confirmation at this point. As you know, the Department of Defense would be the ones who would issue that. Of course, we'll continue to look into the incident and the circumstances surrounding it. And we, of course, reiterate our warning to the Assad regime not to interfere with U.S. aerial assets over Syria. More in Syria?
Iraq?
Iraq? Sure.
Well, just
Oh, go ahead, Justin.
then you're issuing a warning not to do that. So if it's
We would reiterate something
were-
we've done many times.
okay, so if they did in fact shoot it down, what comes with that warning?
Well, Justin, there's no confirmation of that, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with
We'll
you.
check back.
Go ahead. We'll keep talking about it.
Maybe first on Syria and then on Iraq.
Okay?
In Syria, I think last week, State Department officials met with one of the Syrian Kurdish representatives.